Today from the global lane, Israel prepares to defy Joe Biden in Gaza and cross the red line into Rafah.
There's 4 battalions left of terrorists in Rafah. We know that all our hostages are in Rafah. So how on earth are we supposed to finish this war and win this war if we don't go to Rafah?
Blood money. Best-selling author Peter Schweizer explains how China is killing Americans without firing a shot.
The best strategist is the one who defeats his enemy without actually having to fight him. They're doing this by sowing social chaos in the United States. They're literally killing Americans with fentanyl.
And China's plan to radically transform the United States through TikTok, corrupting young minds to hate America, reject science and traditional cultural views.
They want to change the identity and values of America's young people.
And why we need more men like Ireland's St. Patrick. And it's all right here on the Global Lane. After his State of the Union address, President Biden was overheard on a hot microphone, saying Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu needs a come-to-Jesus moment. Biden insists military action in the southern Gaza city of Rafah is a red line Israel must not cross without a plan in place to protect innocent Palestinian lives. Well, joining us with more is Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. Madam Deputy Mayor, it's good to have you with us. So how did you react when you heard about President Biden's hot mic comments?
Well, first of all, we have to say things as they are. And President Biden has sent unprecedented support to the state of Israel since the beginning of the war. He came to Israel. He's shown enormous empathy. And I think he's kind of in a tight spot himself electorally with some of his constituents. And I think he has to show a little bit of kind of toughness, tough love on Israel. Unfortunately, we know there's 4 battalions left of terrorists in Rafah. We know that all our hostages are in Rafah. We also know that Yahya Sinwar, who is the mastermind of this entire war, and of course what started the war, which was a horrible, brutal massacre such as the country has never known, is also in Rafah. So how on earth are we supposed to finish this war and win this war if we don't go to Rafah?
Well, CNN is reporting that U.S. intelligence assessments suggest Prime Minister Netanyahu's viability as a leader may be in jeopardy. Is that an accurate assessment, or does it suggest that U.S. intelligence is working to oust Israel's leader during a time of war?
Well, I really can't comment on U.S. intelligence. I'm not a defense expert. But all I can tell you is that we have to rely on Israeli intelligence that tells us exactly where the hostages are, where the mastermind is, and where the rest and the majority of the battalions that are left are. It makes sense. We've already won the battle of the north of Gaza, so we know that the terrorists have moved to the south of Gaza. We do have a plan in place to protect civilians. We have different areas where civilians can go. And it's very, very interesting that nobody's putting any pressure on Egypt, the country that has a border in Rafah, to try and take in, well, at least the women and the children for temporary refuge. Why is the pressure not on Egypt that actually needs the United States much more than the United States needs Egypt?
And why isn't the pressure on Hamas to release the hostages that it kidnapped? The United States is airdropping humanitarian relief to Palestinians, and now the president and the Pentagon say they plan to deliver aid by sea, constructing a temporary pier on Gaza's coast. Is this being coordinated with the Israeli government? I know President Biden hasn't talked with Bibi Netanyahu in about a month.
Well, I believe that it's being coordinated with the Defense Ministry. I don't see how anybody can build a port in a number of weeks. I think that might be a little unrealistic. But, you know, Israel does everything it can to protect innocent civilians. And if the American government want to deliver more aid, then, of course, they're absolutely welcome, as is any country.
We're now in the Islamic holy month of Ramadan. It appears unlikely that a ceasefire will be negotiated to get the 100 Israeli and American hostages back, at least until Ramadan ends in April. So is there any hope of a breakthrough? What are your expectations? And I know you're concerned about Ramadan.
Absolutely, because Ramadan is always a month that Hamas manipulate people with lies. They tell them that the Jews or the Israelis are storming Temple Mount. We're going to close Temple Mount, which, of course, is the third holiest site for Muslims. It is the first holiest site for Jews. And we, in fact, sacrifice our own freedom of worship in order to keep things calm. But this is kind of the Hamas playbook. Every year they do the same thing.
A Jewish group representing families and victims of the October 7th terrorist massacre in Israel has filed a federal lawsuit against UNRWA USA. The Jewish Advocacy Center alleges that the nonprofit United Nations Relief and Works Agency, USA, quote, operated a terrorist financing scheme in violation of federal law, must be held accountable for supporting that attack. Your thoughts on UNRWA USA and this lawsuit?
Well, let me just tell you that we heard a few days ago that a social worker, so-called, of UNRWA took the body of a soldier over, a dead body of a soldier that was killed by terrorists, over to Gaza to hold that dead body, you know, I don't know, hostage. It's really very sad. We know that the majority of UNRWA workers are local in Gaza, are involved with Hamas. Hamas and UNRWA have become synonymous. UNRWA is an organization that was created in 1949 and basically has spent the last 75 years trying to reverse the declaration of independence of the State of Israel. They have no interest in resettling refugees. They have an interest in keeping the conflict open, keeping the wound open. And, you know, UNRWA is the only organization in the world that grants refugee status by birth.
And we know that UNRWA USA has supported UNRWA with at least $5 million in the last 2 years. And while relief comes... Go ahead.
Yeah, those dollars have gone to terrorists to help build tunnels. The last thing that UNRWA has done is help the Palestinian people. And I'll say even more, the hostility and the hatred that comes from Gaza is also a result of UNRWA school network, which teaches the Palestinian school book, which teaches anti-Semitism, hatred and glorification of martyrs. And the UN and UNRWA have known this for a very long time, and they have ignored it, kicked the can down the road from changing it to a curriculum of peace and coexistence.
And you're the deputy mayor of Jerusalem. Many American Jews and Christians make an annual pilgrimage to Israel during Passover and Easter, and they may hesitate a bit this year because of the Hamas war. So how risky is it right now to visit Israel and tour the holy sites?
Well, Jerusalem is actually so safe that it's become a city of refuge. We still have the evacuees from the north of the country, and they're staying in the majority of the hotels. So we've gone from a city of tourism to a city of evacuees, a city of refuge. I know that many of those hotels will now be hosting people for Passover, and I hope and pray that all our pilgrims, Jewish and Christians alike, will return to Jerusalem soon. Jerusalem is a safe place to come to at the moment, thank God.
It's a great city. Okay, Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, Tuda Rabah.
Thank you so much.
In this election year, China is likely to be a hot topic of political debate. Is President Xi Jinping and members of his Communist Party friendly competitors or enemies of the West? Our next guest contends the CCP is killing Americans and destroying our way of life without firing a shot. Peter Schweizer, president of the Government Accountability Institute, is author of the new book, Blood Money: Why the Powerful Turn a Blind Eye While China Kills Americans. Peter, congratulations on another #1 bestseller. And I know 2 years ago you gave us a New York Times bestseller with Red-Handed, which exposed how American elites get rich helping China. With Blood Money, you dig a little deeper. You contend the United States is already in a hot war with China. Our leaders are passive about it. Explain what's happening and why.
Yeah, I mean, China has a strategy. They call it disintegration warfare that says, look, we don't want to have a kinetic fighting war with the United States because that would lead to all kinds of disruption and damage in China. So we're going to try to beat them by not going to war, but by undermining them nonetheless. It's an idea as old as Sun Tzu, the strategist, who said the best strategist is the one who defeats his enemy without actually having to fight him. They're doing this by sowing social chaos in the United States. They're literally killing Americans with fentanyl, The Mexican cartels are the junior partners. This is a Chinese operation, and they are engaging in other activities that are designed to tear America apart, and it seems to be working.
Well, let's get into this with a look at some of our politicians from both parties. Let's begin with President Biden. I know for at least 5 years now you've conducted extensive research on Biden family connections to China. The president says he's had no involvement in his son Hunter's business, but you contend he has profited. How?
He's profited because his family's profited, and we need to remember that the bribery and corruption statutes in the United States say even if the actual politician doesn't get a dime, if his family member profits, that in and of itself is corruption. And that's what's happened in this case. When you look at an issue like fentanyl, Joe Biden will not confront China on this issue. He said there will be no finger pointing. I think the reason is because of these financial connections. A Chinese gang called UBG is responsible for setting up the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico and making them the kings of fentanyl. They send more of this poison into the United States than anyone. The head of this Chinese gang is a gentleman who goes by the name White Wolf. Zhang An Li is his name. White Wolf has a business partner who gave the Bidens in 2017 a $5 million forgivable loan that the Bidens have never repaid. So you literally have 1 degree of separation between the first family of the United States and this poisonous fentanyl trade. Joe Biden does not want to have a conversation about this because of those entanglements and how poorly it would reflect on his family.
Well, who else? How about the vice president, members of Congress?
Yeah, well, you could look on the Republican side, Senator Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is sort of DOA on these issues as well. He'll say some tough things about China, but he won't actually do anything. And the reason is that his wife, Elaine Chao, her family owns a shipping business called Foremost Shipping that has essentially been set up by the Chinese government to grow and expand rapidly. They've worked together since the early 1990s. What that means, of course, is that the families become wealthy, but it also means that if Mitch McConnell as a senator were to do or say something that particularly angered Beijing, they could destroy the family shipping business overnight. That's the kind of leverage they have and the kind of leverage that they use.
And what percentage of Congress are we talking here that they have leverage over?
I think there's a handful of people. The larger issue, I think, is more a reflection of D.C.'s political culture, and that is we have a lot of national leaders who want to be there. They're kind of go along to get along. Once you realize what China is doing and you look at the facts of how they are killing Americans, really over the last 5 years that they're responsible for the deaths of several million Americans. Once you confront that reality, you can't have business as usual with China. That means making very hard and difficult choices. So some of our leaders are engaging in what Winston Churchill calls looking at our enemies with vacant eyes. They kind of know what's going on, but they don't want to confront the reality because it would make their jobs much, much more difficult.
How about Donald Trump? Now, some people say he's also profiting from business with the Chinese. What did you find?
Yeah, Donald Trump doesn't have any direct financial ties to China, and he's actually, when he was president, was pretty tough on China. I think the one note of caution there is that, you know, Donald Trump probably overestimates the ability of his personal diplomacy to get results with President Xi of China. Remember, in 2018, President Xi promised that he was going to deal with the fentanyl issue. President Trump, you know, applauded him for that and effectively declared victory. The problem is that nothing changed. President Xi lied to him. So the hope, of course, would be that if Donald Trump is reelected, that he would have learned that lesson and not take President Xi at his word and when he makes these promises.
And Peter, last year we saw a spy balloon pass over the continental U.S. before it was shot down off the South Carolina coast. And you mentioned Chinese fentanyl pouring over our southern border from Mexico. So tell us some more about how business and political connections compromise U.S. national security.
Well, it creates a circumstance where large sectors of our business community, particularly Wall Street and big tech, become lobbyists for China. When President Trump was in office, he imposed tariffs on Chinese goods and products. The Chinese didn't go to Washington, D.C. to lobby against it. They instead went to New York and to Silicon Valley, and they went to American businesses and said, guess what? You are going to go and lobby Washington and get them to end these policies, because if you don't, it's going to cost you business in China. So they're able to take some of our business leaders and effectively turn them into lobbyists to lobby our politicians and do their bidding, which is a very, very dangerous and divisive situation for our country to be in.
Okay, up next, more with best-selling author Peter Schweizer and a look at the funding of the transgender movement and the Marxist plan to radically transform America. More now with #1 best-selling author Peter Schweizer and his latest book, Blood Money: Why the Powerful Turn a Blind Eye While China Kills Americans. We've talked about the Chinese Communist Party's agenda to undermine America through deals with U.S. companies and politicians. Now let's look at how the CCP is destroying U.S. society through social media and the funding of culturally divisive issues. You've discovered a link between 2 Chinese billionaires and the transgender movement. Tell us what you learned from your research.
Yeah, this was probably the most surprising finding in the book. There are 2 billionaires in China that have poured tens of millions of dollars into transgender causes in the United States. One of them is actually an American named Roy Singham. He built a business. He sold that business to an investment fund that's partly owned by the Chinese government. That made him a billionaire, and he moved to China. He's sympathetic to the CCP. He supports their positions, and he's poured $161 million into radical causes in the United States over the last couple of years. Among them is the transgender issue. The second billionaire is a guy named Joe Tsai. Joe Tsai was the co-founder and the current chairman of Alibaba, which is a massive company in China. It's basically their equivalent of Amazon. But unlike Amazon in the United States, this is a business that's closely wedded to the Chinese government. Joe Tsai has poured tens of millions of dollars into research related to the transgender issue. What's troubling about these actions is not only their support of the cause, but the fact that they don't actually advocate for these causes in China itself, which leads me to believe that they see it more as a disruptive force in American society than something that they actually embrace as a belief system.
Well, how about critical race theory and the diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda in our educational institutions? What did you find there? Did they have influence on that?
Yes, they're doing a lot on social media to lead to disruptive social chaos. So if you look in the online space, China has thousands of military personnel who in turn each set up thousands of social media accounts in the West posing as Americans. And what they do is basically have half of those social media accounts send out messages that America is a hopelessly racist society and it's irredeemable. The other half of them send out messages that effectively say, I only like white people, I don't like minorities. They're actively trying to pit American against American, and it's working. If there's a note of optimism in this book, I think it would be that perhaps we are not quite as divided on these issues that we think we are. Certainly, there are extreme groups in the United States that are advocating this view about America being irredeemably racist. But I think it's a small minority. It's only being magnified by these efforts of China to sow racial discord in the United States.
And you've been actively involved in countering or trying to counter the election efforts to steal elections. How concerned are you about Chinese communist influence on young minds, especially on social media in this election year?
Oh, they absolutely, I quote them extensively, they absolutely see TikTok as a tool, a vehicle, a Trojan horse, as one Chinese military officer puts it, to undermine the United States. They want to change the identity and values of America's young people. Again, those are their words, not mine. Certainly political elections is part of that, but they have a deeper goal, which is to get younger generation of Americans to embrace their value systems rather than those of the United States.
So what do we do about all this, Peter? The corruption, the influence, it runs deep. Is it too late to reverse the trend?
No, it's never too late. What we need to do, first of all, is deal with Chinese political influence in Washington, D.C. The fact that Chinese companies like TikTok are able to essentially get half a dozen former U.S. senators on the payroll to run interference for them in Washington, D.C., I think is an outrage. It needs to begin there. It also needs to begin with education. People need to be aware of what's going on. Anybody who allows their children to be on TikTok, I think, is making a huge and profound mistake. Any adult who's on TikTok who thinks they're not going to be influenced by this stuff is making a huge mistake. If we are informed, if we are equipped, we can absolutely win this war.
Okay, the book is Blood Money, Why the Powerful Turn a Blind Eye While China Kills Americans. Another New York Times #1. Peter Schweizer, thank you for sharing those alarming insights with us. God bless you.
God bless you, too.
It's that time of year again. Time to break out the green bagels, shamrocks, and shillelaghs and dye the Chicago River green, all in celebration of St. Patrick. Do you ever get the feeling that just like at Christmas, amid all the revelry, people forget the true meaning of the holiday? Many folks misunderstand that St. Patrick wasn't Irish at all. He was British. Patrick was forced into slavery, eventually escaped captivity, and risked his life when he felt God calling him to return to Ireland to bring the gospel back to the pagan people who had enslaved him. Actor John Rhys Davies, who played the elder Patrick in the CBN film I Am Patrick, explains what the patron saint of Ireland endured.
Human sacrifice, idolatry of the worst sort. It was the apotheosis of human misery. And it took a very brave and remarkable man to come back into the certain jaws of death to try and change it.
Patrick certainly knew the meaning of suffering and service. He was a godly man of courage and sacrifice who viewed salvation and the eternal lives of others more important than his own earthly life. Patrick's example is worth emulating. Amidst political turmoil here in the United States and war in Gaza and Ukraine, we need more leaders like St. Patrick, committed to serving others, loving God and their neighbor. That's the takeaway for all of us on St. Patrick's Day and every day. It's the best way forward. And that is no blarney. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Be sure to follow us on the CBN News and NRB channels, YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, Rumble, and our broadcast affiliates. And until next time, be blessed.